I can't live alone anymore. I'm too fat, but I can cook. That's what I told him, a stranger with a rifle, while snow swallowed my voice. The wind nearly took the words right out of my mouth, but he heard them. He had to. I was standing on his porch with frost in my hair, clutching my skillet like it was the only friend I had left in the world. The storm had been chasing me all day down the pass. I'd left the last town at sunrise, thinking I could make it to the valley before dark. But the wagon wheel broke miles back, and I'd walked the rest, dragging my grief and my weight through drifts that wanted me buried with the rest of the forgotten. When the cabin appeared through the white, small black roof, a thin line of smoke, I thought maybe God hadn't finished with me yet. I knocked once. No answer. Twice. Still nothing but wind. On the third try, the door opened. He stood there, tall, broad eyes like pale steel that hadn't learned warmth in years. He didn't say a word, just looked me over, the way men do when they've seen too much and trust too little. So I blurted it out again, louder this time. I can't live alone anymore. I'm too fat, but I can cook. There. My shame on the table, same as the skillet I held out between us. He didn't laugh. Didn't pity me either. Just stepped aside an inch, enough for the scent of bacon and wood smoke to slip through the crack. That smell nearly broke me. Warmth, meat, fire, things I hadn't known in weeks. I stepped inside. My boots left dark prints on his floorboards. The snow melted fast. His cabin was tidy, built by hands that hated waste. Every tool hung straight, every log stacked even. A man who'd rather fix than talk. He poured me coffee without asking. I took it with both hands, too hungry to argue, too tired to cry. The first sip burned my tongue, but it burned the loneliness worse, and that felt holy. The silence between us was thick enough to stir with a spoon. I looked up, saw a picture frame above the mantel, a boy holding a fishing pole, grin big as summer. Before I could ask, the man turned the frame face down. That told me all I needed to know. Some losses don't like company. So I didn't speak again, just knelt by the stove, set down my skillet, and pulled out the last handful of flour I had left. I mixed it with snow melt and a whisper of salt. My hands moved like they remembered something my heart had forgotten care. If this bread rises, I thought, maybe I will too. The man sat across from me, silent, watching. The wind howled, the fire cracked, and somewhere inside that frozen mountain, something small shifted, not the rocks, not the storm, but the part of me that still wanted to live. The snow didn't stop for 9 days. Would he let me stay that long? Or would the silence freeze me before the cold did? Continue with part 2. Distance, about 600, 700 words. You said, continue with part 2. Distance, about 600, 700 words. ChatGPT said, part 2, distance, is approximately equal to 670 words. First-person narration, restrained, cinematic tone, known voice, intimacy. The first morning came slow, the kind that doesn't bother with sunlight. Just more snow, pressing against the windows like a quiet threat. He was already awake when I stirred, splitting wood in the doorway. Every swing of his axe sounded like a heartbeat, steady, sure, unbothered by the strangers sleeping near his fire. I stayed under the blanket a little longer, pretending the world outside the cabin didn't exist. My body ached from the walk, from the cold, from carrying too much of myself for too long. When I finally sat up, the air smelled of pine smoke and fried pork. He didn't turn when he said, "Coffee's on the stove." 2 words more than I'd gotten the night before. Progress. I poured a cup, careful not to spill. My hands still trembled. "Thank you," I whispered. But he was already outside again, lost in the hiss of falling snow. For a while, we lived like 2 ghosts, sharing the same house near, but never touching. He worked. I cooked. He chopped. I swept. He mended the roof. I patched the curtains with fabric torn from my old skirt. We spoke only when needed. Simple things. Salt's low. Firewood stacked. Don't step there, floor's weak. It was strange comfort, his silence, my busyness. I'd always believed loneliness was loud, but his kind of quiet was worse. It made you hear everything you'd been trying to forget. Sometimes when I looked up from the stove, I'd catch him watching me. Not staring, just a glance long enough to mean something, short enough to deny it. Then he'd look away and I'd pretend not to notice. He had a limp, I learned that day. Old wound, maybe from a fall or a fight. When he thought I wasn't looking, he'd brace his knee against the table for support. I wanted to offer help, but he wore his independence like armor. That night, I made stew the thick kind you could almost chew, using dried beans and the last bit of bacon he had. He ate in silence, but when I reached for my bowl, he filled it first. Small mercy, big meaning. After supper, he fixed a loose board by the door. I pretended to read an old Bible I found on the shelf. The pages smelled of dust and regret. When he finished, he sat across from me, the fire between us, the room flickering in orange and blue. He nodded toward the skillet near the hearth. "Your cooking's good," he said. It wasn't much of a compliment, but it landed deep. People used to tell me I took up too much space, too much talk, too much weight, too much want. He just said my food was good. That was enough to keep me breathing. I wanted to ask about the picture, the little boy with the fishing pole, but the way he glanced at the mantel stopped me cold. So I just said, "You built this cabin yourself?" He nodded once. After the fire, there was more behind those words. I could feel it. But he left it there, dangling in the smoke between us. Later, when he turned in for the night, I stayed awake, listening to the wind scratch the roof. I thought about the fire he mentioned, about the boy's face in that photo, about the silence that wrapped this cabin tighter than any storm ever could. I wasn't sure if I was his guest or his ghost. Still, when I lay down by the hearth, I whispered a small promise into the dark. I'll earn my keep here. I'll feed the quiet until it softens. The mountain groaned outside, and the fire popped like it agreed. 9 days of snow can bury a man's words or make them bloom. Which one would happen here, I didn't yet know. Continue with part 3. Bonding, about 700, 800 words? You said, continue with part 3. Bonding, about 700, 800 words? ChatGPT said, part 3, bonding, is approximately equal to 770 words. First-person narration, intimate, slow-burn warmth, Western healing tone. The snow didn't stop on the third day. It came down in fine sheets, thin as breath, steady as regret. The cabin moaned under the weight, and still he worked outside shoveling paths, checking the traps, fixing things that didn't seem broken just to keep busy. I cooked. It was all I knew how to do when the world felt too heavy. There wasn't much left in his pantry. Dried beans, a little flour, bacon grease hardened in a jar. I made biscuits anyway, small ones, brushed with snow melt in prayer. He came in near dark, boots soaked, beard crusted with frost. When he saw what was on the table, his eyes softened not much, just enough that I caught it before he blinked it away. "You keep the place smelling better than it ever did," he said. That was the first time he tried at kindness, and I could feel how unfamiliar it was in his mouth. We ate slow. The only sounds were the wind and the clink of tin spoons. He poured me a second cup of coffee, hot, bitter, generous. When I reached for it, our fingers brushed. He pulled away quick, like the touch burned. I pretended not to notice, but something in me flinched anyway. After supper, he took out a piece of wood and began carving. I watched from across the room. His hands were rough, but careful each stroke, a kind of prayer he didn't know he was saying. "What are you making?" I asked softly. "New latch for the door," he said. Then after a pause, "The old one broke last winter. Never fixed right." He looked at me when he said it, and I wondered if we were still talking about the door. The next morning, I found a small loaf of bread I'd baked sitting by his plate, half gone. He'd left a folded note beside it, just one word: good. No name, no flourish. But I kept that scrap of paper like it was gold. We fell into rhythm after that. He'd bring in firewood, I'd tend the stew. He'd mend something, I'd hum to fill the empty space. One evening, while stirring beans, I started humming a tune my mama used to sing, soft, sad, older than both of us. I didn't even realize it until I heard a chair scrape behind me. "What's that?" he asked. "An orphan's lullaby," I said. "Mama used to hum it when she didn't want to cry out loud." He nodded, eyes low. "I know that kind of song." Silence again. But this time, it wasn't cold. A few nights later, a coyote howled somewhere beyond the ridge. He went for his rifle. I followed, more out of instinct than courage. When we stepped outside, the world was silver moonlight on snow, stars so sharp they looked like they could cut skin. "Don't shoot," I whispered. "It's just singing." He lowered the gun slowly, and for the first time he smiled small, cracked, almost shy. Then let it sing, he said. Something eased between us then, like a knot finally giving way after too many winters. From that night on, we talked a little more. About the valley he used to trade in. About the mine collapse that took his brother. About the boy in the picture, his nephew, not his son. Lost to fever the same week his brother died. He didn't cry. Just stared into the fire until the wood turned to white ash. I didn't try to comfort him. I just reached for the kettle, poured him another cup, and said, "Then you've been alone longer than you should have been." He met my eyes for the first time, really met them. "Guess so," he said. "And you?" I thought about my husband's grave 2 states away, the way folks looked at me when I walked by like fatness was a sin, like widowhood was catching. "I've been alone since before I was alone," I said quietly. We didn't speak after that. We didn't have to. That night, he left the lantern burning longer than usual. I stayed awake to watch its glow crawl across the floorboards, warm and alive. Maybe that's what closeness is. I thought, not words or touch, just light that doesn't go out when it could. By the 7th day, we were still trapped in snow, but the silence between us had changed its shape. It wasn't a wall anymore. It was a room we both finally fit inside. Continue with part 4. Pressure, about 901,000 words. You said, continue with part 4. Pressure, about 901,000 words. ChatGPT said, part 4, pressure is approximately equal to 950 words. First-person narration, cinematic tension, deep emotional undercurrent, none voice, tone. By the 8th morning, the snow stopped lying softly. It turned sharp, crusted, heavy, mean, the kind that snaps branches and tears roofs open. He was outside before dawn, checking the shed where the firewood was stored. I could hear the dull rhythm of his axe cutting through the hush. But then came a sound that didn't belong, a crack too deep, too final. "Ben?" I called through the door. No answer. Only wind. I threw on my coat and stepped out. The cold hit like a fist. He was half buried near the corner of the shed, snow up to his waist, a beam from the roof pinning his leg. "Don't move," I shouted. He gritted his teeth. "Ain't planning to." It took everything I had to dig him free, my hands raw, my breath burning my lungs. He tried to help, but pain made him clumsy. When I finally pried the beam off, he collapsed into the snow. We made it back inside somehow, both shaking. His leg had a deep bruise and a gash down the shin. Blood, dark against pale skin. "Sit," I told him. He tried to wave me off. "I can sit." Something in my voice must have reminded him of someone he once listened to. Because he did. I cleaned the wound with melted snow and whiskey from his cupboard. He hissed but didn't pull away. My hands trembled not from fear, but from realizing how long it'd been since I'd touched another person with care. When I wrapped his leg, he said softly, "Didn't think you'd come out there." "Is 10. "Didn't think I'd stay this long," I said. He gave a half smile. Guess we both misjudged. That night I cooked broth, thick with beans and bits of salted pork. He couldn't eat much, but he tried. The cabin smelled of warmth again, the kind that feels like a truce. But truce never lasts long up here. The next day, the storm broke for real. Blue sky cracked open like mercy, and the sun turned the snow to diamonds. For the first time, I saw the valley below glittering, alive, reachable. He saw it too. "You can leave now," he said quietly, staring out the window. "Road'll hold." I pretended I didn't hear. "I'll make bread today," I said instead. "We still have flour." He didn't argue. But his silence said enough, the kind of silence that sounds like goodbye. By afternoon, a group of traders appeared. Trudging up the trail, 3 men, loud with laughter, skin chapped red from wind. They brought supplies, news, and the kind of eyes that strip a woman bare before she speaks. I hated that look. I'd known it all my life. One of them grinned when he saw me. "Didn't know you took in help, Ben. She's a strong one, ain't she?" Ben said nothing, but his jaw tightened. The man leaned closer to me, voice dripping honey and venom. "You cook too? Or you just keep him warm at night?" The others laughed. Before I could speak, Ben stood. His limp made every step heavy, but his presence filled the room like thunder. "You're in my house," he said low. "Eat your stew or get out." The laughter stopped. The man muttered something about touchy mountain folks, then busied himself with his bowl. Ben didn't look at me. Didn't need to. The air itself held his apology. When they left, he stacked more wood into the stove, rougher than he needed to. I touched his arm. "Thank you." He shook his head. "Men like that ain't worth it." Maybe not," I said. "But the ones who stand up are." He looked at me, then really looked, and for a heartbeat I thought he might say something that would change everything. But he didn't. He just said, "Bread's burning," and turned back to the oven. The loaf had browned too much, but we ate it anyway. Bitter crust, soft heart, like both of us. That night, the temperature dropped again. The roof groaned under new weight. I woke to a sound like something ripping a piece of the outer wall giving way. Ben tried to stand, but his leg betrayed him. I grabbed the lantern, ran outside, and saw that the snow had collapsed part of the shed. Inside were the feed sacks, the coal, the last of the salt pork. If it stayed buried, we'd lose everything. So I did what I always did. I worked. I dug till my nails bled, till sweat froze on my neck. My body screamed, my heart pounded, but I kept moving. Finally, I dragged the sacks out one by one and rolled the coal barrels inside. When I came back in, soaked and shivering, Ben was waiting by the fire, jaw tight with anger, not at me, but at himself. "You could have been killed," he said. "So could you," I shot back. "And I'd rather die doing something than waiting for someone to save me." He stared at me long and hard, then nodded once. "Guess we're alike that way." We sat there, steam rising from my wet clothes, the fire cracking loud between us. That was the first time I saw fear in his eyes, not of the storm, not of loss, but of feeling again. Outside, the wind howled through the broken boards. Inside, we faced something worse, the truth that neither of us knew how to go back to being alone. When dawn came, the sky was calm, almost gentle. The storm had passed. But something else was building, not outside, but inside us, waiting for its own break. Continue with part 5. Break, about 901,000 words. You said, continue with part 5. Break, about 901,000 words. ChatGPT said, part 5, break, is approximately equal to 970 words. First-person narration, emotional rupture, restrained yet cathartic, none voice tone. When the sun finally came through the clouds, it looked wrong. Too bright, too clean. Like the storm had washed the world, but left the two of us dirty inside. Ben's leg healed slower than he wanted, and the silence between us began to stretch again. Not the warm, easy kind we'd grown into. This was the kind that reminded you where your walls ended and someone else's began. Every morning I cooked, swept, mended. Every afternoon he found something to fix outside. It was as if we both knew spring was coming, and with it, a choice neither of us wanted to make. The road would clear soon. I'd have to leave. He never said it, but I could feel it in the way he stopped leaving his cup beside mine, or how he took to sleeping with his door half closed again. That night, I couldn't sleep. I got up, sat by the fire, and watched the embers die. I don't know why I started talking, maybe because I knew he was awake too. "I used to bake for the church fairs," I said softly. "Back when I was still Mrs. Boone." From his room came the rustle of blankets, but no answer. "They'd laugh, you know, say I was the one eating the profits. But they bought every loaf I made. I thought that meant something. Maybe it did." The floor creaked. Then his voice low, tired. "People laugh at what they fear. Especially kindness makes them feel small." I turned toward him. He was standing in the doorway, face shadowed by firelight. "Who made you small, Ben?" He didn't answer right away. Then he walked to the mantel, lifted the framed photograph, the one he always kept face down. "My brother," he said. "Not on purpose. He was the better man, always was. I built this place for his boy after the fever took him. Thought if I built it strong enough, I could keep what was left of him alive." He stared at the picture, eyes glinting like frost. "But when the boy died, I stayed. Too stubborn to leave, too scared to start over. Guess that makes me a ghost with chores." He set the frame back, gently this time. "You're not a ghost," I said. "Ghosts don't bleed, and they sure don't limp. That made him laugh short, cracked, real. The sound filled the cabin better than any fire could. But it was gone just as fast. "Road's clear tomorrow," he said quietly. "You should take it." Oh. Something inside me broke clean then, like ice giving way under weight. "I can't," I whispered. He frowned. "Why not?" "Because I don't have anywhere to go." He stared at me for a long time, then turned away. "You'll find somewhere." I wanted to tell him he was somewhere, that the quiet here, the work, the warmth it had become a home I didn't think I'd ever earn again. But I didn't. Pride's a stubborn animal. So instead I said, "If I bake one more loaf before I leave, will you eat it?" "Always," he said. The next morning I baked. The smell filled the cabin warm, sweet, alive. He sat at the table, bandaged leg propped up, pretending to read an old almanac. When the bread came out of the oven, golden and cracked, I tore off a piece and handed it to him. He took it, ate slow. Then he said, "You'll make some man happy again someday." Some man already could be," I said before I could stop myself. The words hung there, too big to take back. He froze. Then he stood, limped to the window, and said without turning, "Don't say things you'll regret." That hurt more than the cold ever did. I wanted to shout, to throw something, to make him feel what I was feeling, the raw, aching need to belong to something that didn't end in loss. But all I said was, "You already do that enough for both of us." He didn't answer. So I went to the door, grabbed my coat, and stepped outside. The air bit my cheeks. The snow glittered, half melted, half frozen, like it couldn't decide what it wanted to be either. I walked as far as the ridge before I realized the world was too quiet. No birds, no wind, just the soft crunch of my boots. That's when I heard him behind me. "Clara!" he called. His voice cracked on my name. "Wait!" I turned. He was standing in the doorway, breath clouding the air, that photograph clutched in his hand. He limped toward me, slower than the truth but faster than his pride. When he reached me, he pressed the picture into my hands. The boy in it was smiling, gap-toothed, sunburned, happy. His name was Caleb, he said. He loved biscuits more than anything. You make them just like his mama used to. My throat closed up. "Ben." He looked down at the snow, then at me. "I kept this cabin for the dead too long," he said. "Maybe it's time it belonged to the living again." The wind picked up then, carrying his words somewhere between promise and prayer. I wanted to say something, but tears stole my breath. He touched my hand, gentle, steady. "Come back inside. You don't owe me a thing. Just don't go." So I didn't. We walked back to the cabin together, the snow crunching beneath our steps like an old song finding its rhythm again. Inside, the fire still burned. And for the first time, I wasn't cold. Sometimes the hardest thing isn't leaving. It's believing you're allowed to stay. Continue with part 6. Resolution, about 800, 900 words. You said, continue with part 6. Resolution, about 800, 900 words. ChatGPT said, part 6. Resolution is approximately equal to 880 words. First-person narration, warm, cinematic healing tone, known voice. Spring came quiet in the mountains. Not the loud kind you hear in the valleys, all birds and meltwater. Up here it crept in like a secret, one drip of thaw at a time, one soft patch of green among all the gray. The snow shrank away from the cabin walls. The roof dried, and for the first time since I'd arrived, I could smell dirt instead of frost. We didn't talk much about the morning I almost left. Some things don't need rewording once they've been spoken true. But everything after changed. Ben let me help with the roof, though he muttered the whole time about how a woman shouldn't be up this high. I told him the same thing about his leg. He laughed, said, "Guess we both don't listen worth a damn." We worked side by side, patching leaks with pine tar and bark, him steadying the ladder when I climbed. The world looked different from up there, softer, bigger, possible. Inside, I scrubbed the floors till they shone, aired out the quilts, replanted herbs in little clay pots by the window. The cabin stopped smelling like dust and sorrow and started smelling like life again. Sometimes I caught him watching me while I worked. Not the way men used to look, like weighing, measuring, judging, but as if he was seeing the place itself breathe again, and wondering if that meant he could too. One morning, I woke to the sound of hammering. He was out front, carving something by the porch steps. I walked out, hair a mess, apron still on. "What are you building now?" I asked. He didn't look up. "A new latch for the door. The old one's done." The words sat between us for a heartbeat, the same ones he'd said weeks ago, when everything was still frozen. But this time, his voice held something else. Not loss. Renewal. When he finished, he handed me the latch, smooth, heavy oak, polished with linseed. A notch of silver shaped like a crescent moon marked its handle. "So it won't ever stick again," he said. "When you open it," I ran my fingers along the carving. "You made this for me?" "For us," he said simply. "Figure the house should fit both our hands." There, it was not a confession, not a proposal, just a truth sturdy enough to build on. We spent the next days mending fences, both wood and invisible. He showed me how to check the traps, how to read the sky for weather. I taught him how to make biscuits that didn't burn, and how to hum when the stew's thickening so you don't rush it. He said it was foolish. Then I caught him humming the same tune 3 nights later. Every evening, we'd sit outside after supper, the porch warm, the air smelling of pine sap and damp earth. He'd roll a cigarette he never lit, and I'd let the day settle on me like a quilt. Once he asked, "You ever think about leaving again?" I shook my head. "Not unless you stop liking my cooking." He chuckled. "Then I guess you're stuck." A week later, a letter came carried by a trapper passing through. It was from the widow who'd owned my old boarding house down in town. She wrote that someone had asked after me, the landlord, the bills, the gossipers, still whispering. "They said you ran off into the hills," she'd written, "and maybe froze to death." I folded the letter and fed it to the fire. Some things deserve to burn. Ben watched the flames eat it up. "You sure?" he asked. I nodded. "I think the woman they were talking about did die. I just don't think she's me anymore." He smiled slow, knowing. Good. I was starting to like this version better. When the last of the snow melted from the ridge, we took a walk up there. The same ridge where I'd almost left. From the top, you could see the whole valley laid out like an open palm green rivers, copper rocks, light spilling over everything it touched. He stood beside me, shoulders broad against the sky. "You ever think the mountain keeps people who need fixing?" I said. "Or maybe it just keeps the ones who don't quit." He nodded, eyes soft. "Same thing, maybe." We stayed up there till the sun started to drop, painting the snowcaps gold. When we walked back down, I slipped my arm through his without thinking. He didn't pull away. That night, I baked bread again. It rose perfectly soft inside, brown outside. When I pulled it from the oven, Ben looked at it, then at me. "You did it," he said. "No," I told him, smiling. "We did." He reached over, brushed a crumb from my cheek with his thumb, and for once, didn't look away. No grand speech, no kiss, no promises carved in stone. Just the quiet understanding that some lives start again, not with fireworks but with bread and hands, and a fire that refuses to die out. That night, I dreamed of the valley in bloom, of the sound of laughter inside this cabin instead of wind. And when I woke, for the first time in years, I didn't reach for my coat, because home wasn't a place anymore. It was a person and the warmth that stayed after the storm was gone. Continue with part 7, healing closure, about 400, 500 words. You said, continue with part 7, healing closure, about 400, 500 words. ChatGPT said, part 7, healing closure, is approximately equal to 480 words. First-person narration tender, reflective, cinematic calm. Known voice, gentle resonance. By the time summer came, the mountains no longer looked like the same place that nearly swallowed me whole. The snow was gone, replaced by wildflowers that grew out of every scar in the earth. Purple, yellow, stubborn little things that bloomed where nothing should. Ben's limp had eased. He still cursed when the weather changed, but now his voice carried a rough kind of joy, like he'd forgotten what it felt like to have something worth swearing about. We'd built a rhythm, not grand, not romantic, just true. Mornings, I baked and watered the herbs by the window. He'd chop wood or check the traps. Afternoons, we'd mend, share coffee, or read aloud from the old Bible he'd kept mostly for its paperweight. The house stayed warm even when the nights cooled. Maybe because the fire never went out anymore. Maybe because neither did we. Sometimes I'd find the photograph of Caleb, the boy, set upright again on the mantel. Ben never said when he did it, but I noticed he'd stopped turning it face down. Once, I caught him wiping the frame clean, his thumb tracing the boy's grin. "You finally let him see us," I said. He nodded. Figured he'd want to. That night, I baked biscuits golden. Thick, the way Caleb would have liked. We ate them with honey and silence, both sweet. When I went to wash the dishes, Ben said quietly, "You ever miss who you were before?" I thought about it for a long time. The woman who hid her hands when she cooked. The woman who said sorry every time the floor creaked under her weight. The woman who walked into a storm thinking she'd die in it. "No," I said. She walked so I could stand. He reached across the table, touched my wrist. "Then let's both stand a while longer." Outside, the last snow melted into a river that sang against the rocks. The air smelled of pine and fresh bread, and for once, I didn't feel too much of anything. Not too loud, not too large, not too late. Just enough. Before I went to sleep, I stepped outside. The mountains were dark outlines under a sky full of stars. A coyote howled somewhere, far off, not lonely this time, just alive. I smiled. "Let it sing," I whispered. The door creaked open behind me. Ben's voice came, low and steady. "You coming in?" I turned back toward the glow spilling from the cabin, warm, gold, waiting. "Yeah," I said. "I'm home." And that's how the storm ended. Not with silence, but with the sound of two hearts learning how to stay. If this story warmed you, don't forget to share it and subscribe for more healing tales from the frontier of second chances. This is No Knee, Wild West Saga, where every storm ends in light.